Welcome to the Biodiversity webinar, addressing the 70% loss over the last 20 years. My name is Dion Knowles from Radio Systems, and today I am joined by a set of speakers we have Mark Sargent, who's the procurement manager from Murphy's Group. Mark has been a lifelong, passionate person for protecting the natural environment, and he'll be setting the scene for us today. We're also joined by Sam Bauer. Sam is the Head of Sustainability Natural Environment at Balfour Beatty. And Sam will be talking about site implications and considerations. And last but not least, we have Julia Baker. Julia is the Technical Director, Nature Services from Mott MacDonald. And what Julia is bringing to us today is a consideration for what the utility companies and what supply chain members, anybody can be doing on their site, within their facility, to make an impact, to really turn the tide of this decline in biodiversity. Over the course of the session, if you do have any questions, please do drop them into the meeting chat. If you've got any technical issues as well, please drop them into there. At the very end of the webinar, we'll come to those questions and we'll invite the whole of the panelists to address those in a comprehensive manner. Okay, so let's be moving on. First up is Mark. Mark, lovely to see you today. Please do tell us more about biodiversity and what this all really means, why we should be bothered.
Thanks, Diane. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, it's great to be here. More of a difficult subject. So I'm just going to rattle through and give people a basis on what biodiversity is. Worked for 40 years in the construction industry, and I'm not convinced construction gets it. So that's my purpose today. So first of all, what is biodiversity? I'm sorry, I'm just going to put my timer on. So biodiversity, the three elements really to biodiversity. One that a lot of us are familiar with is a variety of plants, animals, fungi, all sorts of things that make up the world around us. This is vital because any sort of depletion in the biodiversity can cause the system, if you like, the web of life to function incorrectly. And it also makes it at risk for damage. Habitats support different sorts of wildlife, different sorts of plants, different sorts of organisms. Very often, if you get a single habitat, it's a problem. The ideal part of a habit or habitat selection is some sort of mosaic. If we look at coral reefs, if we look at forests, or even soil, they're all full of a myriad of different types of organisations, all of which play a part. Within individual species, there is also a huge amount of variation. If we look at ourselves, the recent experience of the pandemic, how some people were very poorly, or even worse through the pandemic. Other people weren't touched. Other people suffered long-lasting effects, like long COVID and things like that. Similar things are true of many, many diseases and ailments. And as a species, we have that variability within us, that diversity within us to resist those things, so that one particular instance doesn't cause the majority of the species to disappear. Can we have slide 2, please, Dion? So why is biodiversity important? Well, I think it's vital. It's absolutely vital. And really, we don't fully understand the full consequences of biodiversity loss. We seem to stumble along and then realise that something's missing, and it was really, really important. So some of the elements that are really important for biodiversity: disease. So disease resistance, more specifically. So we managed to eradicate smallpox many, many years ago. Smallpox is still kept in some laboratories, and it might make you wonder why it's not been destroyed completely, because it was such a devastating disease. The reason is smallpox enters cells in a way in which very few other organisms do. And that ability could be very useful to us. So if we got rid of it completely, we may lose something. A lot of us are familiar with some of the cures that come from the Amazon rainforest. Some cancer cures are based on plant-based products. And a recent one is around dementia and daffodils. There are substances in daffodils which have proved reasonably effective in some treatment of dementia. Now, daffodils have been around for hundreds of years. We all know them. We all see them all the time. Nobody realised how important they were. Food and food security is hugely important. 2 examples: bananas. Have you ever wondered why a banana milkshake from McDonald's doesn't taste like a banana that you get from the grocers? And the reason is the flavour of the banana milkshake is based on the gross Michard bananas, which were almost wiped out in the mid-20th century by Panama disease. So the new banana variety, which was used by the banana growers, tastes slightly different. Not such a huge issue. However, rice in Southeast Asia, there used to be tens of thousands of different types of rice. Now, in somewhere like Thailand, 50% of the land use is used for just growing 2 varieties of rice. Should they be hit by some sort of blight or plague, that could cause a huge amount of food security. Water is very, very can be a problem for us. Things like mangrove swamps protect coastal areas. They're very, very important, but they are susceptible to disease, pollution and removal, leaving areas of country exposed to weather, rising sea levels, etc. We use reed beds in this country quite effectively to take out some heavy metals and other things, prevent pollution of watercourses. That's a natural process that achieves that by various microorganisms within the reed beds that will help to filter those heavy metals out. And I think there are a fair few people on from the water industry today. Our water industry is hugely reliant on microbial action, cleaning water, filtering water, etc., etc. Should we have a situation where those microbes are affected by some sort of disease, some sort of pollution, some other factor, that could cause us an awful lot of problem. Balance and recovery. So problems with biodiversity occur when organisms are reduced or the controls on those organizations are reduced. Many years ago, there was an issue in China where it was felt that small birds were eating lots of rice, lots of grain that the people should be eating. So the birds were decimated. The following year, there was virtually no crop because all the insects that were normally fed on by the birds ate all the crops. So that's a very, very sort of bleak and extreme example. But these things happen. There is a very, very good video, which I'll put into the chat, about the wolves in Yellowstone National Park. The wolves went extinct 70 years ago. They were then reintroduced. And the effect that they have had, even to the extent that they've affected the course of the rivers in the park, is absolutely stunning. But a keystone species, something that is there to control the number of other organisations like deer and such like that, is very, very important and is shown to have had a huge effect, whether they're there or whether they're not there. This balance and recovery is also important because we need that variability to be able to survive changes in climate, levels of disease, levels of predation, all those sorts of things. And finally, on this slide, carbon. I try and stay away from carbon because I think biodiversity is as, if not more important than the carbon concern we've got. But biodiversity does aid in holding carbon. Various sorts of habitats will store a large amount of carbon. For example, wetlands store more than forests. So they're very, very important. But then there's also sequestration, where the ability to absorb carbon is very important. And in that case, new growth forest is very important. But also things called marl beds, which are an undersea coralline algae, are very, very important to those sorts of things, and are at risk from potential fishing industry and things like that. So all of those things only work effectively with a balanced ecosystem, and that's what's very, very important for us, to maintain that balance, and that's where biodiversity comes from. I wanted to illustrate to you what biodiversity looks like. So here we've got a slide of many things. Now, these are all British species. There's nothing from far and wide. These are all British. So this is an example of what's called Batesian mimicry. So these are things that, a lot of them haven't got stings, but they want other creatures to think that they've got stings. So you've got flies, and you've got beetles, and you've got moths and things here, which have all got the black and yellow coloration that a wasp or a bee has got, something that is actually going to sting you. There are a couple of wasps in there, but most of them are harmless. So that's the variety. These are all sorts of things that you will see on flower beds and around the place. Diane, if you could put Dion, sorry, if you could put the next slide. This one is bees. All of these are bees. So there are 250 different sorts of bees in the UK. There is only one honeybee, and it's in the second row down, second from the left. That's a honeybee. Every other one is a different type of bee. So there are minor bees, there are leafcutter bees, there are bumblebees, there are sharp-tailed bees, there are mason bees. All of these creatures live in different habitats. Some of them, like bumblebees, are social bees. They have a nest with a few individuals. None of them are like honeybees. The problem with honeybees, if we put too many of them in, they outcompete all of these bees, and we lose this variety, which is the problem with biodiversity loss that we're experiencing at the moment. If you put the next slide on, please, Dion. So just very, very quickly, what can we do? We can stop poisoning the environment. We can leave nature a little bit of space. We can leave untidy areas for nature to do its stuff. We can repurpose equipment like boots. You can just hang a boot up, and creatures will come and live in it. It might be birds, it might be wasps, it might be bees. Any other theatre, bird boxes, bat boxes. A very important one, just before I finish, is water. Standing water is very, very important, because there are so many organisms that for part of their life cycle are reliant on water, and that's hugely important because they provide food for so many other species. So really, really important. So I'm just about out of time, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. So building upon this, Julia, actually, just after we've spoken to Mark, is going to share some more thoughts when we think about specific other site initiatives that you might be able to adopt. But before we move to Julia, we're going to move on to Sam. So Sam is the Head of Sustainability Natural Environment at Balfour Beatty. Sam has experience of specifically on sites. Sam, this is your turn to share your glory. Tell your story about what you do and what your thoughts are for those managing sites.
Lovely. Thank you, Joanne. And thank you, Mark. Yes. So Yeah, I work with our species. So we build stuff, but as part of building stuff, a lot of the time we are also working either in habitats or working to restore and create habitats. So what I'm going to do is just focus a little bit on the sort of practical lessons that I've learned over the years to successfully deliver that. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So I have had the tremendous privilege and pleasure of working in nature conservation for over 25 years now, in a multitude of different types of roles and different capacities. And over that time, from a hard experience of getting things wrong as well as getting things occasionally right, I've learned that there are some underlying principles which we can apply pretty consecutively or consistently rather to projects. And it doesn't really matter the size of the project or the nature of the biodiversity interventions that we're trying to achieve, the scale or the variety. These principles, I would suggest, sort of stand true to all of them to a pretty consistent extent. So there's just five, and I'm going to go through them and explain them to you now. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So the first and foundational, as the word suggests, important component is any terrestrial habitat. By its name, is going to be based in soil, and understanding and using soil in the correct and sympathetic manner is absolutely fundamental to successful biodiversity or habitat creation and enhancement. If you don't, then at best you're making your life very, very difficult for yourself, and at worst you are effectively doomed to fail. So this is an example of a site where it's a highways project, and within this photograph we have let's see, four different types of habitat that we were trying to create. So there is a area which will be for amenity grassland, so highways seed mix as you'd expect. There's areas of planting, tree and shrub planting. We have a species-rich grassland area, and in the background as well, an area which was to become heathland. And for those four different habitat types, we actually had four different soils that we were going to use, all of which were site one, but all handled and optimized to be utilized in slightly different ways. So let's see, on the left-hand side of the picture where you can see those sticks, that is the area which we were using for creation of tree and shrub planting. So we used our best topsoils that we had obtained on site there, and we actually added additional organic material to try and make them as favorable for the initial development of those trees and shrubs during their first formative years. The reason why we use organic material is actually partly because we were trying to avoid using chemicals, but also because we had undertaken soils analysis. So we knew what kind of soil we were dealing with and where its nutrients were impoverished. At the front of the picture, you can see the sort of darker soils there. That's where we're using, again, our favorable topsoil for our species or the amenity grassland mix. And then on the right-hand side of the picture in the foreground, we've got a subsoil. We've actually used the uppermost layer of subsoil. And so it's almost the topsoil. It's that bit where it blurs from sub to top. So it's very nutrient poor, but not completely nutrient deficit. So there was lower nutrients rather than complete without nutrients. And we use that as our uppermost layer to give that ideal seed bed for our species-rich grassland. And then in the top right-hand corner of the picture there, we can see a bit of a shrub planting, but before that we had heathland we were trying to create there. And with our soils there, we use our nutrient-poor soils, but we also added sulfur and we added bark fines to try and affect the pH, the acidity of the soils as well. So just one site, one area, all these different soils. And yes, if you could click on, please, Diane. And as you can see, this was very early on. So this was in sort of year one, I think, possibly year two. So the shrubs are beginning to take hold, and you see how they're doing quite effectively. And at that time, because this was quite early on in the development of this site, it was predominantly inundated with oxeye daisies in our seed mix. Over time, that actually became more varied and more eclectic, but it worked very effectively. Okay, we can move on to the next slide, please. The next principle that's vitally important is actually understanding your site. And by that, I mean not just relying on guidebooks and best practice instructions or design, actually really understanding the nuances of each particular site that you're working in, and working your plans and your strategies to reflect what you've actually got there on site. This project is a verge enhancement scheme that we undertook on behalf of National Highways in the West Country. And it was a long strip of road with lots of sites dotted along it, which the client had identified as being favourable for enhancement. And by enhancement, in this context, we're talking about increasing the floral diversity, specifically to try and make it more valuable a resource for pollinators. Now, the design that we inherited had basically one spec for all of these sites. But what we did was go out and do very detailed soils analysis and botanical analysis of each one of those individual plots. And then so instead of having one specification, we developed 3 separate specifications, which we kind of used like an ingredients list for each one of the plots, optimizing which one we use more of on each one to try and make it really tailored in the very minutiae to each single area to make the most out of it for the purposes of biodiversity. That meant some actually it was much lighter touch, others it was much more substantial, and it was all reflective of exactly what we had on site. Next one, please. Oh, it's good. Oh, it's all gone a bit. Can we go back? Those all gone a bit wrong.
It's gone a bit. Adaptations doesn't want to be here. You need to wing it.
That's fine. Okay, if you got the next photograph, so we've got something to look at while I'm talking.
Doesn't have. I've got foundations photograph.
If you sorry, ignore the wording. It should be adaptation here, and this was a project, and the picture that you can't see, which is sort of the before picture, is of this woodland, but it was completely full of conifer. It was conifer plantation on an ancient woodland site. And as part of a project, we had to remove the invasive species that was present. So it was absolutely inundated with rhododendron. And we also needed to reintroduce coppicing, which is when you cut down broadleaf trees and they regrow multi-stemmed up over time. So it's where it's like ongoing harvesting of timber. Now, conifer, you can't coppice. So it just dies, it doesn't grow back. There's a few exceptions, but generally that's the case. Now, what we had in our design, what we had in the environmental statement, our commitment, what we had in our contract to deliver was all great, it was fine. But actually, when we were on site and we were looking at what was there, we realized that we're really missing the trick. Because actually, what the woodland would benefit from, as well as removal of the invasive species, was a very, very heavy thin of the conifer to enable the existing broadleaf to flourish and regenerate. So we could basically, over time, create a new woodland on the same plot without losing canopy cover. So we had to work with our subcontractor very closely to find a completely cost-neutral way of achieving this, because this hadn't been intended for, this hadn't been budgeted for, this hadn't even been committed for. So we were looking to do an entirely new package of works without any more money. We managed to achieve it, and you can't see the before, but the after picture here, you can see there's a few conifers in the foreground and the background, but then there's emerging broadleaf canopy coming up. And actually, over time, we did additional works in there again, which hadn't been specified, using coppicing and creating microglades to diversify and create even more structural interest for all sorts of species. Because one of the main targets for this was dormice. But so the key lesson here is, rather than just going with what's written down, looking at your site, and when you understand it, then adapting your plans, your processes to reflect what is naturally naturally there to maximize its value. Okay, we can go on to the next one. Good. This is the correct slide with the correct wording. So, collaboration. Now, obviously, it's very, very complicated, some of this stuff, and it can also require an awful lot of voices in the room in order to deliver it effectively. And one of the things I've learned very much over the years is that to effectively deliver any kind of habitat creation or enhancement, you do have to work collaboratively. That's both within the project, so that's not just listening to the ecologists and the biodiversity specialists, but also the subcontractors, landscape architects, but also across disciplines. So working with your earthworks team, your drainage teams, all of them coming and collaborating together in order to achieve a combined result. And in this example here, this is an area where we are doing a very extensive heathland restoration. So where we had conifer plantation in the top right-hand corner, you can see what it looked like before. And then we are removing a large number of those trees to create this much more rare and precious heathland habitat. And working on this has required extensive collaboration with our design partners, with stakeholders. So that's with Natural England, with our clients, with the local wildlife trust and the local authority, all listening and contributing and working together to achieve a result which is going to be the most favorable for ecology, for biodiversity in that landscape. Okay, and then moving on to the next one. And this is my final principle, which is to have patience. There's things that you can do to try and nudge and occasionally speed up or slow down nature, but ultimately natural processes take the time the natural processes take. And it's important to allow that to happen. And if you have the luxury of a project or a contract which enables that kind of approach, then it can pay great dividends. This example is one pond. It's the reason why the two bottom pictures look different from the top two pictures, apart from because they're different in a different part of time, is that you're standing at the opposite end of the pond. So if you sort of switch sides of the pond. But basically, this is a pond that we dug, and then we were going to plant it up following spring, but we noticed very early on that it was actually colonizing by itself. And so instead of rushing to plant it up, we gave it some time just to see what arrived there naturally. And because we did that, that meant we could actually then streamline, no pun intended, our planting to reduce the actual amount that we needed because we had so much interesting stuff happening of its own accord. So we then planted it up with a revised mix. And then with the shrub layer that you can see around it, that was all self-originating, self-set. We didn't plant that got there on its own. And then we actually had to go to our client and ask for additional funding so we could come back in and do additional maintenance to remove some of this to create that or maintain structural diversity, light and shade and all that kind of the eclectic mosaic that you're trying to achieve with habitat management a lot of the time. And we could do this because we had 8 years to deliver it in, and that luxury of time was a tremendous benefit. It actually worked out cheaper, but it also worked out much more beneficial in terms of habitat. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sam, for your time there. Really, really interesting perspectives. Thank you. Over to Julia now. Julia is, as we mentioned earlier, Julia is the Technical Director, Nature Services from Mott MacDonald. Julia, please do share your perspective on biodiversity and the supply chain perspective. We've seen this great piece from Sam about on-site, but I know that there's a whole other bigger picture that you've got to talk about.
Yes, and just to say thank you, Mark and Sam, really interesting. I'll never think about banana milkshakes and McDonald's in the same way. And Sam, I'd love to come out on site because it's been far too long for me sat in the office. Your work's amazing. Okay, shall we move on to the next slide, please? So where to start? You know, we know that for our industry, we critically depend on nature. We know that certainly the rising stars that we see for people fresh to the employment market if we want the best talent that's out there for our industry, we certainly hear time and time again from engineers, from project managers, from accounts, those rising stars really want to work with a company who's genuinely making a difference for our planet. But where to start? So we do a lot of work with maintenance teams, with depots, and there's always something. There's always something. So go to the next slide. I'm going to give you our top 3. Now it starts kind of basic and then moves up the chain in terms of a level of ambition. And these are just ideas. So top 3. Now, number 1, it does what it says on the tin. If you have, and you can even do it in your garden, I mean, if you have patches of lawn or grass, and we work with quite large maintenance depots, or we also work with estates such as this one, which is in the NHS, just don't mow it in May. I mean, it's literally that simple. And I think it was Plant Life. It's such a genius idea. And I do actually with my neighbours, which is a relief because my neighbour has the noisiest lawnmower ever. But you literally don't mow it in May. Now there's a couple of things to do. Firstly, we work a lot with estates and management teams who, when they have these lawns, say, well, it's in the contract. So we go and we speak to the landscape contractors, and I've never had a landscape contractor who says, no, of course, we'd love to. And then, we work out other things that they can do within May. There are some areas that we work with, such as the NHS estate. So like, Julia, that's fine. When people drive in to our estate hospital, they do need to see it look tidy. So you can definitely pick and change the areas. And like this one, we do a lot of signs and raising awareness. And if you go on to the next slide, it's just extraordinary. And this is Liverpool's Hospital Meadows. And after a couple of seasons of No Mow May, the variety of grassland species that came up simply because they were not mowing in May. And it's a fantastic case study and really interesting. And it's widely applicable when we work with depots or offices. You have a sort of grassland area. And there's a really great, it's only about 4 or 5 minutes, that YouTube video as well, just to say, look, we didn't mow in May and this is what we found. So it's super easy, super simple, and really effective. Number 2. So I've taken this actually, and again, from Courtyards, but just because we actually took this work that we were doing, supporting some hospital estates, transforming concrete areas into such a vibrant, welcoming space. And it was actually a lot for obviously visitors and patients, but the staff would say, look, can we have one, please? And then we took this concept and we worked really closely with maintenance teams and depots teams to say, well, where are there spaces for your staff? And it's incredibly effective where you think about really low maintenance planting arrangements. And you can have staff, you can have visitors, and we work quite closely with Speedy Hire, and they got a fantastic depot in Milton Keynes. And right at the back, they created this, which was a tiny space, but they created this lovely green area, and staff can sit on it on a bench and just watch what happens, and everyone talks about it. So this could be very, very simple to arrange. I mean, it could literally be a couple of bird feeders and mark all the good stuff that you were talking about, with a space for staff, or it could actually be some kind of courtyard planting, which is more involved in landscaping and things like this. But even on construction sites, on depot sites, just a green area can work wonders. There's also lots of bee-friendly planting advice, and you really don't have to have a big space at all. I mean, the Wildlife Trust have got Setting Up Your Nectar Cafe, which I love. It's such a lovely example, and they give some really, really good advice. They also talk about how to make bee hotels. But even the pictures there, I mean, even if you have a planter with a little bit of space, just to plant some bee-friendly planting, and all of these websites share some good ideas about the kind of plants that really help. And it just makes a difference. Never think that I've only got a small space and what it can do, because it really, really makes a difference. And combining this with some educational signs, and I think especially when, work is so busy, just to have the space for people or visitors certainly makes a difference. So a tiny space, a bit of bee-friendly planting, or to support Mark and all your photos, it does make a difference. Right. The final one, for those feeling ambitious, the green walls. Back in the day, honestly, it was that, so the technology now is amazing, but back in the day, the frames were really heavy. You had to water them constantly. Some were even rated as a fire risk, which was never helpful. But the technology now is extraordinary. And this actually, so this is the Milton Keynes depot by Speedy, and it's just stunning, the green wall there. And it's completely self-regulating, if you like. I mean, they planted it up, but it's got this very clever rainwater harvesting that just keeps it going. And what happens actually is quite funny. If you see right at the top, you see that little area of sunlight that comes in. So I was visiting Speedy, and you look at the green wall and it's incredible. But I saw this patch of the green wall that really wasn't doing very well. You know, some of the plants were a little bit patchy, and it's quite bare, and they weren't looking too good. So I thought, I'm going to say something at reception. I mean, you've got this amazing green wall, and then this little bit at the top that's not faring so well. Maybe it's, you know, a bit of the rainwater harvesting thing that's not working. So go to reception, and Sally's there, and I'm signing in. Say, Sally, the green wall's beautiful. I mean, it really is amazing. But there's this patch right at the corner that's not doing too well. Julia, let me explain. And then she explains what happens. And she says, everyone does it. It could be a CEO or a truck driver. They all do it. They come around the corner, they stop. They see the green wall, and then they reach out and touch it. And the reason those plants aren't doing very well, can you imagine the poor plants, like, yet again, you know, they're constantly being touched. And then she said, Julia, the green wall's absolutely fine. And she was so right. And I don't know if you have these moments which were such a nothing moment, but actually quite profound, because there was I thinking, nature, we need to fix it, we need to recover it. There's that little patch of the green wall. And she was absolutely right, that people just had this way of looking at it, and then they wanted to touch it. It's like, Julia, let them, just let them, because the rest of the green wall is fine, and it is absolutely beautiful. So I just, if you have space, the technology for green wall now is fantastic, and there's loads of like pop-up green walls and things you can get, or you can go and do something like this. Next slide. But to highlight a book that came out in December 2024, and it's available in Audible or hardback as well. Kathy Willis, she's based at the University of Oxford, and she has such a lovely, engaging way of writing. You really feel that she's talking directly to you. And she collated all of these evidence, and as the words there say, it's newly discovered evidence showing that remarkable things happen to our bodies and our minds when our senses connect with the natural world. And it's just extraordinary. And I wanted to finish off with a quote, if you go to the next slide. So she finishes the book with this: we now know enough to self-prescribe nature when in our homes, offices, or working spaces. However small these individual actions might be, overall, they have the potential to provide a large number of health benefits, and we need to be encouraging others to do the same. Nature is far more than just something that is useful to our health. It is not an indispensable commodity, it is inherently part of us. So to end on the fact that, especially when our working life is so busy, that our staff and the way that we work together, just having that little space of green can really make a difference. So next slide. If you'd like to know more about the work that we do at Mott MacDonald, go on to the next slide, please. We've just published a podcast, and we were keen to grab a variety of colleagues and friends in the industry to really just talk about what nature means to them. And the one there is Amelia Woodley. She's ESG Director of Speedy Hire. And our final episode, episode 8, was from our brilliant early career professionals from around the business, just saying they're here. They're soon going to be the leaders, and they will very soon be the leaders, and what nature means for them. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Julia. Some brilliant takeaway pieces. So I'm thinking bee hotels, green walls, bird feeders, just simple. I mean, even here at Radius, I'm thinking outside the window and the door and where we've got a picnic bench, and we've just got a picnic bench and a tree. Just even putting a bird feeder out there, as simple as it might be, would start the process. And I think if, you know, once you start with little things, then you get a momentum. So I think hopefully everybody can take those pieces away, remember that it isn't a bird feeder, it is something so much more. It is something, and I think that's often people get really critical. They go, oh yeah, the government are just thinking about dormice. What's the big deal about dormice, honestly? But then they have to educate society to see the greater ramifications, which comes to the point where we've got questions, everybody. And one of the questions that I think is really relevant here for us to talk about, invite all the panelists to, is, you know, you're saying all this great stuff, and we're in a tough economic climate. We could all just say, what if we do nothing? Do nothing, guys. What is the implication of doing nothing for us? Go on, tell me.
I can jump in with a quick comment. Actually, you know, if we did nothing, that would help. But we don't do nothing. We're destroying the whole time. And that's part of the problem. Doing nothing, leaving stuff alone a bit would be brilliant. And the point is, our entire system, I'm not going to jump on anyone else because I know other people have a comment to make on this as well, but we are, as Mark pointed out initially, utterly reliant on natural systems. And natural systems, you can think of them like a machine. And the parts of that machine is the biodiversity. And if you start losing the biodiversity, you start losing parts of the machine, and eventually the machine will cease to function. When that happens, all the things that we are reliant upon to live, such as to be able to breathe air, drink water, and eat food, let alone have a rich, you know, cultural life, that machine that underpins all of that will start, and is actually already starting to collapse. So it's not a matter of doing nothing, it's a matter of stopping harm and starting to swing the balance the other way. So that's my 2 pence.
I think there's also an addition to that, in that we have done so much damage in the past to these systems. And yeah, what Sam says is absolutely right. We should leave a lot of stuff alone, but there is other stuff that needs our help. And you know, whether they're rare species, whether it's just in bringing nature into our area, like Julia says, it's absolutely vital for us. And the number of people I come across who, when you show them things of nature, we do work away days and we go to nature reserves. It's always staggering, whether it's a muntjac deer, whether it's a caterpillar, whether it's this, that, or the other. People are fascinated. So it's great to give opportunity within the workspace for people to have a look at nature as well as outside.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think taking a kind of more of a business perspective, there's no industry. You know, I mean, we just, Sam, what you talked about, how reliant we are on the soils, you know, and that stops soil erosion. I mean, you know, whenever there's a landslide that stops the train, it causes critical economic and social disruption. But as an industry, to build, we design stuff, hand it over to Sam to build, we just rely on those natural resources, and our supply chains are really, really fragile. If you have a scarcity of natural resources, what happens? The price goes up. So just purely from, quite like the job, you know, purely from an industry point of view, we are so dependent on nature, and it's crazy to, you know, bite the hand that feeds us in a way. But also we work with energy sector, water sector clients, transport sector. So all of our infrastructure providers have set ambitions for nature. And they've done that for a good reason, because they know the economic and business imperative to do that. And what they ask myself and Sam, you know, we're the ones who are coming up with the solutions. And I love the way that, and it was so brilliant the way that you said, actually, I think this woodland could do with something else, but how can we balance out the cost? Because what you said was, whatever you get handed and whatever you think is a barrier is not. You just need to find the puzzle to unlock that solution, you know, the solution rather. So, and thinking about, you know, the Great Grid Upgrade or the major water sector, that comes with the recovery enhancement of nature. It's not, either or. It's simply the way that our industry is now set up.
Absolutely. And to sort of add on that, and that great, the word that you used there about solution, because this is the thing that's can be so transformative, especially those of us working in the engineering sector, is the recognition that it's not just a matter about looking after nature there and letting it do its thing, which is valuable and important, but also it's such a tremendous tool for us to deliver things like water treatment and a whole raft of different nature-based solutions, which are often more cost effective and have multiple benefits rather than singular benefits, and often traditional grey infrastructure or in conjunction with traditional grey infrastructure. So we can have a functional relationship with nature as well. It's not just a matter of it being a kind of, there's this thing that we have to not touch and let do its thing, which is important, but also it's an asset which we can optimize and use to the benefit of the whole of society to address these massive problems that we have around, which are all, being exacerbated by climate change.
I see we've all got an impact that we could each individually potentially make within our organisations, even by saying, look, can we get a bird feeder? But how can we make change within those organisations? I mean, Sam, Julia, Mark, have you got some resources that you could just, I know, Mark, you've got your wolves video, Julia, you've got your video about the No Mo May. Maybe we could drop those into the chat. We can share those with people. Any other resources that will allow people attending the webinar today to go to their organisations and say, hey, this is something we have to care about. These are some of the things that we could easily be doing. We're about to go, May's 6 weeks away. And we could simply be saying, actually, let's not mow, guys, let's leave it. That's actually, we could save money here, even if you wanted to think of it like that, and just start something small.
I can jump in there. Your best resources is probably going to be your work colleagues.
Right.
You go around and find someone who's equally as passionate, because it won't take long, I promise you. And I can speak working on construction sites, or there was always someone, and then head down, do something really interesting for nature, and then people want to know about it. And then it's a lovely, like, can I join the gang for nature? And your best chance is when you find someone who's just equally as passionate. We've just had we're doing a bit of an office audit, and I was working with our office team who look after like recycling and all these kind of things, and they were like, Julia, is there anything like nature stuff we can do? It's like, yes, okay. So we started this whole like nature, looking at the office teas and coffees and things like that. There's some fantastic coffees that help to support like Amazon rainforest and things like that. So like, which suppliers and how can we support regenerative farming through our office food suppliers? When we did that in our London office, everyone talks about it. And suddenly I was on the call to the Birmingham office, to our Glasgow office, like, Julia, can you help us out, do the nature thing? So it's a lovely way that you've just got to find someone, start something, do something interesting, and I promise you word will spread. Sam, you got that, haven't you, as well?
No, totally, yeah. And I mean, I think there's 2 points, isn't there? There's definitely a generational thing, and I get this a lot with our early careers people. It's kind of it is just an accepted thing that this is really, really important, that they care about it. So it's very easy to find assets amongst that peer group, not assets, but collaborators in that group, and they also are pushing and driving for change and hungry to make a difference, and not prepared to accept the status quo and be fobbed off with just that's because that's the way we've always done it kind of answers. So you capitalize on that useful vigor, because it's powerful stuff, and also. But there's experts everywhere. I remember being on the project that you and I worked on, Julia, many years ago. One of the best ornithologists on that project wasn't in our environment team at all. He was our surveyor, but he was so clued into the birds, and I would go to speak to him, and he helped me more than anyone to understand what we were doing and how it was reflecting on the birds. So there are experts everywhere, and there's passion for this everywhere. You only have to think about how revered David Attenborough is in this country to understand how important this is to us. So there are allies everywhere. And when you may try to strip down the science a little bit, strip down, you know, the idea that you have to be an absolute expert. It's not about that. It's about appreciating nature. We're part of it and finding these little opportunities, and they can be small measures, but lots of small measures add up to big things.
And look out for more videos, webinars from us in the future. We do have a few that you can go back and watch on demand. We've got one on gender inclusivity in the industry, where we looked at the decline of women in the industry last year, and we also have another one on net zero, where we're specifically looking at water and gas sectors within the utility industry and what their goals were and what we need to do in terms of keeping pace on that as well. So thanks everyone.